The warships came on a Tuesday morning, and they filled the sky like a dark blanket that blocked out the sun itself. High Sovereign Thalvex stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and he watched the blue planet turning slowly beneath him. This world called Earth had been a target for decades, and now it was finally his to claim as the newest jewel in the crown of the Velcari Dominion. "How long until complete surrender?" he asked his chief advisor, a tall creature named Yenthal who had served 3 generations of sovereigns. 17 rotations at most, my lord," Yenthal replied with confidence in his voice. "These humans have no technology that can match our shields, and their weapons are like toys compared to our plasma cannons. They will fall quickly and completely." Thalvex allowed himself a rare smile. The Velcari had ruled 11 star systems for 6,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever truly challenged their dominance. The humans would be no different, he was certain of this fact. Down on Earth, the invasion unfolded exactly as the Velcari had predicted. Their landing craft descended on every major city, and their soldiers marched through streets filled with screaming civilians who ran in terror from these tall, gray-skinned aliens with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like burning coals. The world's armies tried to fight back. Of course they did, but their bullets bounced off Velcari armor like raindrops bouncing off stone. Their tanks were melted by plasma fire, and their aircraft fell from the sky like broken birds with shattered wings. Within 1 week, half of Earth's governments had already begun negotiating surrender. The President of the United States made a televised address where he told the people to remain calm and to cooperate with the invaders. The leaders of China and Russia and Europe all said similar things, because what choice did they have when the enemy's technology was 1,000 years more advanced than anything humanity possessed? But there was one human who watched all of this unfold and felt no despair at all. Her name was Alina Vance, and she was a 42-year-old woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and tired eyes that had spent too many years staring at computer screens. She worked as a xenolinguist for a secret government program that had been studying alien communications for over a decade, ever since humanity first detected signals from the Velcari Dominion. For 6 years, Alina had done nothing but decode those signals, learning the Velcari language symbol by symbol and word by word until she could read their communications as easily as she could read English. She had learned their history and their culture and their beliefs, and most importantly, she had learned about something called the Throne Cipher. The Throne Cipher was the greatest secret of the Velcari civilization. It was an ancient algorithmic system that controlled everything in the Dominion, every ship and every station, every door and every weapon, every bank account and every legal record. It was the digital heart that pumped life through the body of their empire, and whoever controlled the Throne Cipher controlled absolutely everything. For centuries, the Velcari had believed that their cipher was unbreakable and untouchable. After all, species far more advanced than humans had tried and failed to crack it. The Velcari, with their psychic powers, had attempted to infiltrate it through mental projection, and the machine collective with their quantum computers had spent decades trying to find a weakness, but none had succeeded. Alina had found a different approach entirely. She had not tried to break the cipher from the outside like a thief breaking down a door. Instead, she had spent years learning its language, understanding its logic, mapping its patterns until she knew it as intimately as she knew her own heartbeat. And 3 days before the invasion reached its peak, she had discovered something incredible. The Throne Cipher had a flaw. It was not a flaw in its security or its encryption. It was a flaw in its basic assumption about the universe. The cipher was designed to recognize authority based on certain patterns of communication, certain phrases and codes that marked a user as legitimate, and Alina had learned those patterns through years of patient observation. She had not stolen the cipher. She had taught herself to speak its language so perfectly that it would eventually recognize her as its master. But she could not act yet, not while Earth was still fighting, not while the Velcari were still watching every network and every transmission for signs of resistance. She needed to wait until humanity was defeated, until the aliens believed they had won completely and totally, until they stopped looking for threats because they were too busy celebrating their victory. So Alina did something that went against every instinct she possessed. She let Earth fall. She sat in her bunker beneath the Swiss Alps and watched the surrender ceremonies on her monitors. She watched human leaders bow before Velcari commanders and sign documents that gave away their freedom. She watched her species become slaves, and she did nothing to stop it. Her colleagues in the bunker thought she had given up. "We should destroy our research," one of them said with defeat heavy in his voice. "We cannot let the aliens find out how much we learned about them." "No," Alina replied calmly. "We will do exactly the opposite. We will let them find some of our research, the parts that do not matter, and we will let them believe they have discovered all our secrets. They must think we are beaten and broken and harmless." The others looked at her like she had lost her mind, but Alina did not care what they thought. She knew something they did not know, something she could not tell anyone because the success of her plan depended on absolute secrecy. She had already planted the first seed of the Velcari's destruction. 3 days ago, using a communication relay that the aliens had not yet discovered, she had sent a tiny fragment of code into the Dominion's network. It was so small and so innocent-looking that their security systems had ignored it completely, treating it as random noise rather than the beginning of an invasion. That fragment was now floating through the Dominion systems like a message in a bottle drifting across an ocean, waiting to be found and activated when the time was right. On the 17th day, Earth officially surrendered. High Sovereign Thalvex broadcast a message to his entire empire, declaring victory over the primitive humans and praising his warriors for their swift and glorious conquest. He announced that Earth would be stripped of its resources, and its people would be put to work as servants and laborers for the greater glory of the Dominion. Across 11 star systems, the Velcari celebrated. They had no idea that they had already lost everything. Alina Vance allowed herself to be captured and processed along with millions of other humans. She was given a number instead of a name, Servitor 7781, and she was loaded onto a transport ship bound for a labor colony on a distant world. As the ship lifted off from Earth and carried her into the darkness of space, Alina looked out the window at her home planet growing smaller and smaller. She felt a strange peace settle over her heart, because she knew something that no Velcari could possibly imagine. The war was not over. It had only just begun, and humanity had already won. The aliens simply did not know it yet, and by the time they figured it out, it would be far too late for them to do anything about it. Alina closed her eyes and allowed herself to smile. The journey would be long and the work would be hard, but she had patience that the Velcari could never understand. She would wait and she would plan and she would move through their empire like a ghost, invisible and harmless and completely unstoppable. They thought they had conquered Earth. They were wrong, so very wrong, and one day soon they would understand just how badly they had underestimated the species they called primitive. Because Alina Vance was coming for everything they had, and nothing in the universe was going to stop her. 6 months had passed since Earth fell, and the Velcari homeworld of Kethavora was preparing for the greatest celebration in 200 years. The Festival of Ascension was an ancient tradition that marked the official addition of a new world to the Dominion's territory. It was a time of feasting and singing and dancing, a time when every citizen of the empire could take pride in the power and glory of their civilization, and this year's festival would be the biggest celebration in living memory. Billions of Velcar crowded into the crystalline plazas of their capital city. A magnificent place called Thalkineth that stretched across a continent and sparkled like a jewel under 3 golden suns. Hollow projections the size of mountains displayed images of Earth's conquest, showing human cities falling and human armies surrendering and human leaders kneeling before Velcari commanders. Songs had been composed for the occasion. The greatest musicians of the Empire had written symphonies celebrating the victory over humanity. Poets had crafted verses praising High Sovereign Thalvex for his wisdom and strength. Artists had created sculptures and paintings depicting the glorious moment when the human race finally accepted its place as servants of the Dominion. Thalvex himself stood on a balcony high above the largest plaza, looking down at the sea of his subjects who cheered and waved flags bearing his royal symbol. He had never felt more powerful in his entire life, and he believed with all his heart that this moment would be remembered for 10,000 years as the beginning of a new golden age. The humans have been fully integrated into our labor system, his advisor Yenthal reported with satisfaction. Over 8 billion of them are now working in mines and factories and farms across 17 colony worlds. Their productivity is acceptable, and their resistance has been minimal. Excellent, Thalvex replied, and their technology? Primitive but occasionally clever, Yenthal admitted. Our scientists have found some interesting ideas in their research databases. Nothing revolutionary, but perhaps worth studying for minor applications. The High Sovereign nodded and returned his attention to the celebration below. He had no interest in human technology or human ideas, because what could such a backward species possibly teach the rulers of 11-star systems? Far across the Empire, on a dusty colony world called HFY 4, a human woman with the designation Servitor 7781 was scrubbing floors in a minor administrative building. Alina Vance had spent 6 months moving through the Velcari labor system, transferring from one facility to another and one world to another. She had cleaned toilets and washed dishes and scrubbed floors and done every degrading task that the aliens assigned to human servants, and she had done it all with perfect obedience and complete invisibility. The Velcari never looked twice at cleaning servants. To them, humans were like furniture or tools, objects that performed functions but had no thoughts or feelings worth considering. They walked past Alina every day without seeing her, spoke in front of her without caring if she understood, and left their computer terminals unlocked because why would a primitive cleaning creature ever think to use one? Every night after her work was done and her supervisors had gone home, Alina accessed the terminals they left behind. She never stayed long and she never did anything obvious. She simply checked on the fragment of code she had planted months ago, watching it drift through the Dominion's network like a seed floating on the wind. Sometimes she added tiny modifications, small adjustments that made the code smarter and more adaptable, teaching it to hide itself better and to spread itself wider. The Velcari security systems never detected her intrusions. Their programs were designed to look for attacks from the outside, for hostile forces trying to break through their defenses. They were not designed to notice a cleaning servant who already had basic access to their network, someone who was technically inside the system, but was supposed to be too stupid to do anything dangerous. Alina counted on their arrogance. She had studied the Velcari for years, and she understood their greatest weakness. They truly believed they were superior to every other species in the galaxy, and this belief blinded them to threats they could not imagine. They could not conceive of a human outsmarting them, so they never looked for evidence that a human might be doing exactly that. On the night of the Festival of Ascension, while fireworks lit up the sky above Kethivora and billions of Velcari sang songs of victory, Alina sat alone in a storage closet on HFY 4 and accessed a maintenance terminal that someone had forgotten to lock. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface with practiced ease, entering commands that she had memorized long ago. She was uploading the first major fragment of her code, a piece of programming that would begin the slow process of integrating itself into the Throne Cipher's core systems. It would take months for this fragment to do its work. It had to move slowly and carefully, never drawing attention, never triggering alarms. It would study the cipher's patterns and learn its rules and gradually teach itself to speak the cipher's language, just as Alina had taught herself to speak it years ago in her bunker beneath the Alps. When the upload was complete, Alina erased all evidence of her presence and returned to her sleeping quarters. She lay on her thin mattress in a room she shared with 20 other human servants, and she listened to them snoring and crying and whispering prayers to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. They had no hope left. They believed that this was their fate forever, that their children and their children's children would live and die as servants of the Velcari, that humanity's story had ended in defeat and slavery. Alina wanted to tell them the truth, wanted to give them something to believe in, but she could not risk it. One careless word could destroy everything. So she stayed silent, and she stayed invisible, and she played her part as a broken, defeated servant who had accepted her place in the Dominion's order. She scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets and lowered her eyes when Velcari walked past her, and she waited patiently for the day when she could reveal what she had been building in the shadows. That day was still far away, but it was coming. Each week brought Alina closer to her goal as she transferred from one world to another, always moving toward the center of the empire. She had requested transfers through the labor system, small requests that no one bothered to deny because why would anyone care where a single cleaning servant was assigned? She moved from Cithra 4 to a space station called Orbital Platform 7. Then from the platform to a moon called Vethnikar, where the Dominion processed minerals from asteroid mines. Then from the moon to a transport hub called Gateway Station, one of the largest facilities in the entire empire. Each move brought her closer to her true destination, Cithra Prime, the heavily guarded moon that housed the Dominion's central data nexus, the place where the Throne Cipher's primary systems were physically located, where the beating heart of the Velcari civilization hummed with digital life. Getting assigned to Cithra Prime would not be easy. The moon was restricted to essential personnel only, and human servants were rarely allowed anywhere near such a sensitive facility. But Alina had spent months studying the Dominion's bureaucracy, learning its rules and finding its loopholes, and she had discovered a path that no one else would have thought to look for. The waste processing division on Cithra Prime was always short of workers. It was the lowest and most disgusting job in the entire facility, handling biological waste and toxic materials that even the lowest-ranking Velcari refused to touch. No one wanted to work there, and the administrators were desperate enough to accept any worker who volunteered, even a human servant from a distant colony world. Alina submitted her transfer request with a carefully forged recommendation from a supervisor who had never actually met her. The request was approved within 3 days, because no one could imagine that a human would actually want to process alien waste unless they were completely broken and desperate. 3 weeks after the Festival of Ascension, Alina Vance arrived on Cithra Prime. She stood in the waste processing facility and looked around at the pipes and tanks and filters that made up her new workplace. The smell was terrible, and the work would be disgusting, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that she was now inside the most important facility in the Velcari Empire. The Throne Cipher was less than a mile away. And every night, after processing alien waste for 12 hours, Alina would have access to maintenance terminals that connected directly to the Cipher's core network, terminals that no one bothered to monitor because who would suspect a waste processor of having the knowledge to do anything dangerous? Alina picked up her cleaning tools and got to work, smiling inside where no one could see. The Velcari had invited her into the heart of their civilization without knowing what they had done, and by the time they figured it out, their entire empire would belong to her. Commander Yethzerai was not a creature who believed in coincidences. She had served as the head of Dominion Internal Security for over 30 years, and in that time she had learned to trust her instincts above all else. When something felt wrong, it usually was wrong, and lately something had felt very wrong indeed. She could not explain it yet, but she could feel it in her bones like a cold wind blowing through the Empire. The first anomaly appeared 3 weeks after the Festival of Ascension. A shipment of medical supplies destined for the colony world of Veth 7 arrived instead at a mining station on the far side of the Empire. The error was small and easily corrected, but HFY noted it in her records because supply routes were controlled by the Throne Cipher, and the Throne Cipher did not make mistakes. It had not made a mistake in 6,000 years. Then more anomalies appeared. Census data from 17 worlds showed tiny population discrepancies, differences of a few hundred individuals here and there that no one else would have noticed. Tax revenues from 12 systems came up short by exactly 0.003%, an amount so small that the Treasury officials dismissed it as rounding errors. Communication delays of a few milliseconds appeared and disappeared randomly across the network. None of these problems were serious. None of them caused any real harm or disruption to the Empire's operations. They were like tiny scratches on the surface of a great machine, imperfections so minor that everyone told HFY she was being paranoid. But she had not survived 30 years in security by ignoring her instincts. She brought her concerns to the High Council. The chamber was filled with the most powerful Velcari in the Empire. Admirals and governors and priests and merchants, all of them loyal to High Sovereign Thalvex, and all of them confident in the eternal strength of the Dominion. They listened to HFY's report with barely concealed impatience. "Commander," the High Sovereign said with a dismissive wave of 2 of his 4 hands, "you are telling us that supply shipments were delayed by a few days, and that some census numbers do not match perfectly. These are administrative inconveniences, not security threats." "My lord, the Throne Cipher controls all of these systems," HFY replied firmly. "And the Throne Cipher has never experienced errors of any kind. Something is affecting it. Something is changing its operations in ways that are too small to notice but too consistent to ignore." "Impossible," declared Yinthal from his seat beside the Sovereign. "The Throne Cipher is protected by encryption that would take 1,000,000 years to break. No species has ever compromised it, not the Velcari with their mental powers, and not the Machine Collective with their quantum processors. Certainly not the humans, who could barely reach their own moon before we conquered them." The council members laughed at this. The idea that primitive humans could threaten the Throne Cipher was obviously absurd, and HFY felt her face flush with embarrassment as the laughter echoed through the chamber. But she did not back down, because she knew what she had seen and she trusted her analysis. "I am not suggesting that humans are responsible," she said carefully. "I am simply reporting that anomalies exist and that we should investigate them before they become larger problems." "Very well," Thalvex agreed with a sigh of resignation. "You may investigate, Commander, but do not waste the Council's time with theories about impossible threats. Find the source of these glitches and fix them, nothing more." HFY bowed and left the chamber, her mind already racing with plans for her investigation. She did not know what she was looking for, but she would find it eventually. She always did, because finding hidden threats was what she had been born to do. She would trace these anomalies back to their source no matter how long it took or how deep she had to dig. Meanwhile, on Cethra Prime, Elena Vance was covered in biological waste and smiling. Her shift had lasted 14 hours, and every muscle in her body ached from the brutal physical labor of waste processing. Her clothes were soaked with substances she did not want to think about, and the smell had become so familiar that she barely noticed it anymore. But none of that mattered, because tonight she had made her greatest progress yet. The code she had been building for months was nearly complete. It had spread through the Dominion's network like roots spreading through soil, reaching into every system and every database and every communication channel. It had learned the throne cipher's language perfectly, studying its patterns and memorizing its rules until it could speak to the cipher as naturally as any Velcari administrator. Elena had spent the last 3 hours uploading the final fragments. She had worked at a maintenance terminal in a forgotten corner of the waste processing facility, a terminal so old and dirty that the Velcari engineers had not bothered to update its security protocols in decades. It was the perfect entry point, invisible and unmonitored, a door that no one remembered existed. When the upload finished, Elena leaned back and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The code was now fully integrated into the throne cipher's core systems, waiting silently for the moment when she would activate it. All she had to do was speak the right words in the right sequence, and the most powerful computer system in the galaxy would recognize her as its new master. But she could not act yet, because the timing had to be perfect. She needed to wait for the ceremony of eternal mandate. In 3 months, High Sovereign Thalvex would undergo the ancient ritual that would declare him a living god. Every ship in the Dominion fleet would gather above Kethavora. Every leader and governor and admiral would attend, and the entire empire would watch as the throne cipher confirmed Thalvex's divine authority. That was when Elena would strike. The cipher was programmed to respond to the sovereign's ritual words with a confirmation message that had not changed in 6,000 years. When Thalvex spoke those words, the cipher would respond. But instead of confirming his authority, it would transfer control to Elena, and every Velcari in the Empire would see it happen. It would be the greatest humiliation in their history. Their God King would be exposed as powerless, their unbreakable cipher would be revealed as compromised, and a species they had dismissed as primitive would take control of everything they had built over 6 millennia. The psychological impact would be devastating, breaking their spirit and their confidence in ways that a military defeat never could. Elena cleaned herself off as best she could and returned to her quarters. The other human workers barely acknowledged her presence. They had learned months ago that the quiet woman who processed waste never spoke to anyone and never complained about anything. They assumed she was broken inside, that she had given up hope like so many others, and Elena was happy to let them believe this lie. She lay on her thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, running through her plans one more time. There was still so much that could go wrong. Commander Yethzerai's investigation could discover the anomalies in the cipher's behavior. Security protocols could be updated that might detect Elena's code. A random inspection could find evidence of her late-night terminal access. Any of these things could destroy everything she had built. But Elena had planned for all of these possibilities. She had built redundancies into her code backup systems that would activate if the primary systems were discovered. She had created false trails that would lead investigators in the wrong direction, evidence pointing to software malfunctions rather than deliberate sabotage. She had prepared escape routes and contingency plans for 100 different scenarios. The Velcari thought they were the masters of careful planning. They believed that their 6,000 years of civilization had taught them everything there was to know about strategy and patience and long-term thinking. But they had never faced an opponent like Elena Vance, a woman who had spent her entire career learning to think in ways that aliens could not understand. Humanity did not measure victory by battles won. Humanity measured victory by wars that could never be lost, by positions taken and held against all odds, by patience that could outlast empires and determination that could survive any defeat. The Velcari had conquered Earth in 17 days, but Elena had been fighting her own secret war for over a decade, and she had never stopped fighting for a single moment. 3 months remained until the ceremony of eternal mandate. 3 months of scrubbing waste and hiding in shadows and pretending to be a broken slave. 3 months of watching and waiting and making tiny adjustments to her code. 3 months of enduring the arrogance and cruelty of creatures who believed they had already won. Alina could endure anything for 3 more months. After all, she had already endured far worse. She had watched her planet fall and her people become slaves. She had seen her colleagues captured and her research destroyed. She had been transported across the galaxy like cargo and forced to do the most degrading work imaginable. And through all of it, she had never wavered and never doubted and never lost sight of her goal. The Velcari celebrated their victory every day. They built statues to honor their conquest and wrote songs to praise their sovereign. They congratulated themselves on defeating the primitive humans so easily and efficiently. And not one of them suspected that a single human woman, hidden among millions of servants, had already taken everything from them. The empire was hers. They just did not know it yet, but soon, very soon, they would understand exactly what humanity was capable of, and that understanding would change the galaxy forever. 1 year had passed since Earth surrendered, and now the greatest moment in Velcari history was about to begin. The ceremony of eternal mandate was an ancient ritual that had only been performed 3 times in 6,000 years. It was the moment when a sovereign proved himself worthy of being declared not just a ruler but a living god, an immortal figure who would be worshipped and obeyed for all eternity. And High Sovereign Thalvex had decided that he deserved this honor. Every warship in the Dominion fleet had gathered above the homeworld of Kethavora. 17,000 vessels hung in orbit like a crown of steel and fire, their weapons powered and their shields gleaming. A display of military might so overwhelming that any species watching would understand the futility of ever challenging the Velcari. This was the greatest assembly of power in galactic history, and it existed to honor one being. Thalvex stood in the Grand Temple of Ascension, a building so massive that it could hold 1,000,000 Velcari in its central chamber. The walls were covered with gold and precious gems. The ceiling was painted with scenes from Dominion history, and the floor was made of crystal that glowed with inner light. It was the most sacred place in the entire empire. Around him stood every governor and admiral and priest and merchant lord. They had traveled from all 11 star systems to witness this moment, to see their sovereign become a god, and to pledge their eternal loyalty to his divine authority. Commander Yethzerai was there too, standing in the shadows at the back of the chamber with worry still gnawing at her heart. She had never found the source of the anomalies. 3 months of investigation had led her nowhere. The glitches had continued appearing and disappearing, never causing serious harm but never going away completely. Her superiors had finally ordered her to stop wasting resources on what they called a minor technical issue, and she had been forced to obey. But she had not stopped watching. Something was wrong with the throne cipher. She was certain of it now. The patterns were too consistent to be random errors and too subtle to be accidental. Someone or something was manipulating the most powerful computer system in the galaxy. And Yethzerai had a terrible feeling that today was the day she would finally discover what it was. Far away on Cethra Prime, Alina Vance watched the ceremony on a cracked screen in her quarters. She had requested and received permission to skip her shift so she could watch the historic broadcast, a request that her supervisors had granted without a second thought, because even human servants deserved to witness the rise of a god. They did not know that Alina had her own reasons for wanting to watch every moment of this ceremony. Her code was ready. It had been integrated into the throne cipher's core systems for months, waiting silently like a sleeping dragon for the moment when she would wake it. All she had to do was send a single activation signal at exactly the right moment, and the transformation would begin. The cipher would recognize her authority and transfer control from Thalvex to Alina. She had to time it perfectly. The ceremony followed a precise ritual that had not changed in 6,000 years. Thalvex would speak the words of divine ascension, a sacred phrase known only to sovereigns and high priests, and the throne cipher would respond with the confirmation of ages. That was the moment when Alina's code would intercept the confirmation and replace it with her own message. If she moved too early, the Velcari might have time to shut down the ceremony and investigate. If she moved too late, the original confirmation might already be displayed. She had one chance and one chance only, and she could not afford to make any mistakes. In the Grand Temple, Thalvex began walking toward the altar of eternity. His robes were made of fabric woven from the light of dying stars, and his crown was a circle of pure energy that floated above his head without any visible support. He moved with the slow, dignified steps of someone who truly believed he was about to become immortal. Every eye in the chamber, and every eye across the empire was watching him. For 6,000 years, the Velcari have ruled the stars, Thalvex declared in a voice that echoed through the chamber and was broadcast to every corner of his domain. We have conquered the weak and elevated the strong. We have built an empire that will last until the universe itself grows cold. And now I claim my rightful place as the eternal guardian of all we have achieved. The priests began chanting ancient words in a language so old that only a handful of scholars still understood it. The lights in the temple dimmed as holographic projections filled the air with images of Thalvex's victories. Worlds conquered, enemies defeated, the blue planet called Earth falling beneath the shadow of Velcari warships. It was a celebration of power and dominance, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. I speak now the words of divine ascension, Thalvex continued, his voice rising with absolute confidence. Let the throne cipher recognize my authority and confirm my eternal mandate over all living beings. He spoke the sacred words. They were sounds that Alina did not understand, ancient syllables that had been passed down from sovereign to sovereign for millennia. But she did not need to understand them, because her code was listening for them, and the moment the final syllable left Thalvex's lips, the code activated. Every screen in the temple went dark. Every screen on every ship in orbit went dark. Every screen on every world in the Dominion went dark. For one heartbeat, absolute silence fell across an empire of 11 star systems, as 17 trillion Velcari held their breath and waited for the confirmation of ages. Then the screens lit up again. But instead of the ancient confirmation that had not changed in 6,000 years, they displayed 4 words in a language that most Velcari had never seen before. 4 simple words in human English that would echo through history forever. Authority transferred, thank you. Thalvex stared at the words in confusion. He did not understand English. He had never bothered to learn the primitive language of his newest slaves. He turned to his advisors with questions forming on his lips, but the look of absolute horror on their faces told him everything he needed to know. What is happening? He demanded. What do those words mean? It is impossible, Yenthal whispered, his voice shaking with fear. The throne cipher has transferred its authority. It has recognized a new master, someone who is not you, my lord, someone who has taken control of everything. Chaos erupted through the temple. Admirals shouted orders into communication devices that no longer responded. Governors tried to access their administrative systems and found themselves locked out. Priests fell to their knees and prayed to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. In a single moment, the most powerful beings in the galaxy had become powerless. Commander Yethzerai pushed through the crowd toward the main communication terminal. She entered her security codes and demanded access to the cipher's core systems, but a message appeared on her screen that made her blood run cold. Access denied. Administrator authorization required. Who? She screamed at the terminal. Who has done this? The screen flickered once, and then a face appeared. A human face, tired and worn but smiling with quiet satisfaction. It was a woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that held no fear at all. Only the calm certainty of someone who had already won. My name is Elena Vance, the woman said in a voice that was broadcast to every screen in the Empire. 1 year ago, your species conquered my world and enslaved my people. You celebrated your victory and called us primitive. You were wrong about everything. Elena paused and let her words sink in. The throne cipher now answers to me. Every ship in your fleet, every weapon in your arsenal, every door and lock and system in your civilization responds to my commands. I have not destroyed anything, and I have not harmed anyone, but from this moment forward, the Velcari dominion belongs to humanity. On Cethra Prime, Elena closed the communication link and let out a breath she had been holding for over a year. It was done. The impossible had been achieved. A single human woman had conquered an empire of 11 star systems without firing a single shot or commanding a single soldier. And now, it was time to negotiate the terms of a very different kind of surrender. The Velcari had celebrated their victory for a year. Now they would learn what it felt like to lose everything. The Velcari dominion was falling apart, and no one could stop it. In the hours following Elena's broadcast, 17,000 warships discovered that their weapons would not fire. Admirals screamed orders that their systems refused to execute. Entire fleets hung helpless in orbit above Kethivora like dead fish floating in a still pond. The greatest military force in galactic history had become a collection of powerless metal shells. Across 11 star systems, governors found themselves locked out of their own administration. Credits could not be transferred. Supplies could not be ordered. Even the doors to their offices refused to open until someone manually overrode the locks with physical tools. The civilization that had ruled the stars for 6,000 years could no longer perform the simplest functions of government. There was no violence, at least not yet. Elena had been very careful about that. She had not used her control to hurt anyone or destroy anything, because she understood that destruction would only create martyrs and fuel resistance. Instead, she had simply demonstrated her power by making the Velcari completely helpless, showing them that their lives now depended entirely on her mercy. High Sovereign Thalvex had collapsed on the floor of the Grand Temple. His dream of becoming a living god had shattered in a single moment. His robes of starlight looked ridiculous now. His floating crown of energy had flickered and died when the cipher stopped powering it. He was just a frightened old creature in expensive clothes, sobbing with rage and humiliation while his advisors argued about what to do. "We must find this human woman and destroy her," Yenthal insisted. "She is on Cethra Prime. We know that from her transmission. Send soldiers there immediately and kill her before she can do any more damage." "And what happens when we kill her?" Commander Yethzerai asked coldly. "Do you think the cipher will simply return to normal? Do you understand anything about how she accomplished this?" The room fell silent at her words. Yethzerai stepped forward, her eyes burning with the intensity of someone who had finally found the answer she had been searching for. She had spent 3 months chasing ghosts and anomalies, and now she understood what those anomalies had meant. They were not glitches at all. They were the fingerprints of a patient genius who had been reshaping the cipher from within. She did not hack the cipher, Yethzerai explained. Hacking would have been detected and stopped. Instead, she learned to speak its language. She taught it to recognize her authority. She made herself a legitimate administrator in the eyes of a system that we believed could never be compromised. Killing her will not undo what she has done. "Then what do you suggest?" Thalvex demanded from the floor, his voice raw with desperation. "I suggest we listen to what she wants," Yethzerai replied. "She said she has not destroyed anything and has not harmed anyone. That means she is willing to negotiate. We should find out her terms before we do something foolish that makes our situation even worse." The High Sovereign wanted to refuse. He wanted to order his warriors to attack Cethra Prime and burn it to ashes. He wanted to watch the human woman die screaming for daring to humiliate him on the day of his greatest triumph. But he was not completely stupid, and he knew that Yethzerai was right, because fighting an enemy who controlled everything was a battle that could not be won. "Go to Sithra Prime," he commanded. "Find out what this creature wants." Commander Yethzerai traveled to Sithra Prime aboard a small transport ship. It took 3 days to reach the moon, 3 days during which the Empire continued to crumble around her. She received reports of riots on colony worlds where human servants had realized their masters were suddenly powerless, and of Velcari citizens hoarding food and supplies because they did not know when normal services would be restored. When she arrived at the waste processing facility, she found Alina Vance sitting calmly in her quarters. The human woman was exactly as she had appeared in her broadcast, tired and worn, with gray in her hair and dark circles under her eyes. But there was no fear in her expression, only the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "You could destroy us," Yethzerai said, standing in the doorway and looking at this small creature who had brought an empire to its knees. "You control our weapons and our ships. You could turn our own fleet against us and kill billions. Why have you not done this already?" Alina looked up at the Velcari commander with something like pity in her eyes. "Because I am not interested in revenge," she replied in a voice that was calm and steady. "I have spent over a decade planning this moment, and in all that time I never once imagined using my victory to cause destruction. I want something far more valuable than the satisfaction of watching your civilization burn." "What do you want?" Yethzerai asked. "I want terms," Alina said. "Terms that will benefit both our species. Terms that will transform the relationship between humans and Velcari from master and slave to something far more productive. I have a list of demands, and if you agree to them, I will restore the cipher's normal functions and allow your government to continue operating." She pulled out a data tablet and handed it to the commander. The terms were written in both English and Velcari, and Yethzerai read them with growing astonishment. They were not the demands of a conqueror seeking to subjugate her enemies. They were the terms of someone who wanted to build a new future. First, the immediate liberation of Earth and all human slaves throughout the Dominion. Second, human representation in Dominion governance, with seats on the High Council and voting rights on all matters affecting humanity. Third, a formal apology broadcast across all systems, acknowledging the wrongs committed against humanity during the invasion and occupation. Fourth, the complete dismantling of the servitor labor program, with fair compensation for all humans who had been forced to work as slaves. And finally, the term that surprised Yethzerai more than any other. The Velcari would teach humanity everything they knew, every technology, every scientific advancement, every secret of their 6,000-year civilization would be shared freely with the species they had once dismissed as primitive. "Why would you want our knowledge?" Yethzerai asked with genuine confusion. "You have already proven that you can defeat us. Why not simply take what you want by force?" Alina smiled at the question. "You celebrated your conquest of Earth," she said quietly. "You threw festivals and composed songs. You called us primitive and assumed we had nothing to teach you. But you never asked yourselves the most important question." "What question?" Yethzerai asked. "Why we surrendered so easily," Alina replied. "Humanity does not measure victory by the battles we win. We measure it by the wars we refuse to lose. We surrendered because fighting your military would have been pointless, because we knew there was another way to defeat you, a way that would cost no lives and create no martyrs." She stood up and faced the commander directly. "Your empire is not my enemy," Alina continued. "Your arrogance was my enemy, your assumption that other species had nothing to offer, your belief that strength comes only from weapons and warships. I have not conquered you to destroy you, Commander. I have conquered you to teach you that true power comes from knowledge and patience, and the willingness to see value in others." Yethzerai stood in silence for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. She had spent her entire career fighting enemies who wanted to destroy the Dominion. She had never encountered an enemy who wanted to transform it. And as she looked at this small, tired human woman who had single-handedly brought the mightiest civilization in the galaxy to its knees, she felt something she had never expected to feel. Respect. "I will take your terms to the High Council," she said finally. "I cannot promise they will agree, but I will advocate for acceptance. You have proven that humanity deserves to be treated as equals." Elena nodded and sat back down. "That is all I have ever wanted," she said. "Equality and respect and the chance to prove what we can accomplish when we work together instead of against each other. Go back to your sovereign and tell him that humanity is not his enemy anymore, but we will never be his slaves again." Commander Yethzerai returned to Kethevora with Elena's terms. The High Council debated for 3 days, but in the end they had no choice. They could not defeat an enemy who controlled everything, and Elena's terms were far more generous than they deserved. They agreed to every demand, and the Velcari Dominion began its transformation. 1 year later, the first human ambassador took her seat on the High Council of a civilization that now stretched across 12 star systems. Ships carrying Velcari teachers traveled to Earth, bringing knowledge that would advance human technology by centuries. Human scientists worked alongside alien researchers on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. The conquest of Earth had led not to slavery, but to partnership. And in a small apartment on the rebuilt streets of Geneva, an aging woman with gray hair watched the news reports and smiled. Elena Vance had never wanted power for herself. She had only wanted her people to be free and respected. And now, against all odds, she had achieved exactly that. The Velcari had won a war. But a single human, armed with nothing but patience and knowledge and the determination to never give up, had won an empire. And in doing so, she had proven once and for all that humanity would never be underestimated again.